right.
Chief executives are stepping down at record rates. Badly managed transitions have cost companies billions of dollars in lost
I wonder why. I'm just kidding.
market value.
If you've got a good company with good product, the next most important thing is who's in charge.
You may have been a great CEO 10 years ago. Are you going to cut it now?
Businesses need stability, so why are so few putting plans in place? I'm Isabel Berry.
I don't know if, I mean, yes, stability, but I think it's more the, the free market is supposed to is known for adapting and changing very quickly, right? So isn't that what it needs instead of, I mean, with that it should come stability, but I don't know.
I host the FT's Working It podcast, and I write a newsletter about the workplace. In this series, I'll explore some of the most pressing issues around the future of work and talk to senior leaders about how they are making work better
The world is too dynamic. To keep up, you have to do leadership development.
for everyone. CEO turnover is at an all-time high, and over the
Bum bum bum.
past few years, we've seen many high-profile leaders leave, and in some cases regain, their top positions.
Oh yeah, that guy. Hmm. How did that even happen? Like he was kicked out and then all of the employees threatened to leave, so then they brought him back. Like it's kind of a suspicious story.
There are a couple reasons why we are getting so many new CEOs right now. The first one is that during the pandemic, lots of companies held on to their CEOs for perhaps longer than they might otherwise. The second thing that happened is since Russia invaded Ukraine, the whole environment has changed for companies. Interest rates are higher, costs are higher, we've had killer inflation.
So does that mean that CEOs were quitting in mass in 2008? I mean, technically I can see that, but for a different reason.
Shifted from a sort of growth environment to a much more constrained environment. So companies need different kinds of leaders.
While some CEOs recognise when the time is right to plan a transition, others need to be told to step down by their boards or are even abruptly removed. Between October 2023
Pat Gelsinger.
and October this year, more than 1,800 US CEOs announced their departure. That's a 19% rise from the previous year. Although the full reasons for exits aren't always disclosed,
I'm pretty sure the main reason is that most CEOs are boomers and they probably want to retire.
retirement, burnout, changing roles, underperformance, and misconduct are often cited. Poorly managed CEO transitions in S&P 1500 companies have resulted in $1 trillion of lost market value annually. With so much at stake,
See, they say that it's lost market value, but is that based off of best case scenario? I don't understand how they can predict how much money they're losing. Money that they never even had their hands on. Does that make sense?
why are some boards not getting this right? To find out more about effective succession planning, I went to my alma mater, St Catherine's College, Oxford, which is itself undergoing a leadership transition, to meet Valerie Mocker, CEO of coaching firm Wing Women, and an experienced board member and board advisor.
I know that
Uh-oh.
whenever I read surveys of boards, they always say CEO succession planning is one of the top priorities for us as a board. Do you think that actually happens in practice?
On a personal level, you know that saving for retirement is important. That doesn't mean that you actually save enough for when you're going to retire. And in the same way, as a sports, we very easily get dragged into the day-to-day business of what it means to be a board member. So you meet and you discuss quarterly reports, but we certainly, as boards in general, don't spend enough time on succession planning. Succession planning is a hard thing to talk about. Essentially, you need to talk to your CEO or CEOs and to the executive team and say, so once you leave, who could take over your job? It's not an easy conversation.
What's the attitude of CEOs themselves to?
I mean, this is the thing. As far as I'm aware, yes, a lot of CEOs do dedicate themselves to their companies and whatnot. But I feel like most CEOs, they're just, for them, it's just another job like everybody else. They don't actually care about the company. So I don't think it's that complicated. I think it's just a bunch of old men that want to retire. They'll give a damn about the company, so because they're gonna receive their money regardless. So why train somebody else? Does that make sense?
To succession planning.
It is important that we have CEOs at the top who have come in knowing that at some point their role will change, or they might have to leave to make room for new people.
So you set the expectations right from the start.
Yeah, I would always ask this question in the interview process already about how long do you want to stay? What do you want to do after you leave? And what are you going to do in the time that you are here to train up people so that they can also follow in your footsteps once you leave? They are also the CEOs who will be more collaborative, more empowering, and also more effective in leading their teams.
And what happens when
I'm pretty sure those types of people are the ones who, let me put it this way. You have two options. You can either hire someone with a prior high status or family connections or whatever, who is probably not going to want to struggle very much, or you can hire someone eager to have an opportunity. Just saying.
transition is forced, a CEO resigns, or there's ill health, or there's a scandal? How should boards react in those circumstances? And how quickly should they seek a new CEO?
In an ideal world, you want to find the right candidate and not the most readily available candidate. That's why succession planning is so important. And when we talk about succession planning, ideally, I like to talk about succession practice. So you need to have people in the organization who you give the opportunity to practice taking.
Imagine that. Imagine actually giving high paying roles to people who've been working in a company for many, many years. Wow, who would have thought about that?
Over a role with more responsibility. So that if you have a crisis, you have people who are immediately able to step up and where you as the board know, I trust these people to take over the job, even if it's just for a certain period of time. It's never about the technical ability. What we need to train them in is the kind of softer factors, the human factors, the understanding how to strategize and how to really navigate an organization.
I mean, yes, but then you have companies bringing in CEOs from other places and almost completely ignoring the people who've been working for them for a long time. I understand that there's a lot that goes into being a CEO, but like, come on, seriously?
Or you also navigate people who have very big egos. It's not enough to just be the busy bee who does really good work. One of the reasons why I built Wing Woman is to make
Very big egos, huh? I wonder what kind of people fit in that category.
sure that we have a space where people learn what these rooms of powers look like.
After speaking to Valerie, I realised the value of having a continuing and wide ranging focus on succession planning, not just for the person at the top, but for all sorts of roles. Experience and practice is vital, and that task of securing a diverse talent pipeline is even harder. Boards are actually getting older. Spencer Stewart research on UK boards shows that 90% of board members are now over 50.
See? That's what I'm saying.
And there are CEOs who stay on, who everybody wonders when they will go, but people don't want to push them out, like Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase.
Yeah, 'cause he's the GOAT. I mean, it's kind of frightening to when you realize that he actually kind of was one of the few people who predicted the 2008 financial crisis, which is pretty impressive. So, yes, he ended up making Chase into the largest bank, and like it's kind of a monopoly at this point, but credit where credit's due, I guess.
Chase or Larry Fink at BlackRock, who are both
Uh-oh.
seen as sort of important big figures in business, and so nobody's going to tell them to go. But there is concern sometimes that they are not planning appropriately for the future. Jamie Dimon, for example, has a reputation for having pushed out lots of people who could have been his successor and have gone on to run other banks. He would, of course, say that his new generation of potential successors is equally good, and and the bank will be in great hands if and when he decides to retire. It is the single hardest thing for a company in many ways. If you've got a good company with good product and a business model that will throw off money, the next most important thing is who's in charge. And so, I guess you could say the average tenure, I think, is now around 5 years for big public companies, which means they don't screw it up all the time. But that means 1 out of every 5 companies is changing CEOs every year.
That's actually insane. That is actually insane. Okay, so there's this kind of CEO, I forgot what it's called, that comes in whenever a company is going broke, and their job is just to fix it, just to put it in the right track. And they receive like double the compensation that they would have if they had been just a regular CEO. So what I'm wondering is, are these people maybe the CEOs that actually have talent, maybe what they're doing is instead of becoming legitimate CEOs, they're going this other route as becoming like this sort of what's it called again? Contractors. Yeah, they're becoming contractors.
Goldman Sachs, the global investment bank, has been working on a method to help keep their leaders in place. I went to the bank's office in London to find out more from its Chief Learning Officer, James Fulton, and leadership consultant Kate Lai, who work together to help leaders, both inside and outside Goldman Sachs.
One of the prime tools that every leader has every year is the tool of feedback. And what we can do is make sure that that's more useful, both.
Imagine if the people in charge of the corporations actually received feedback. We wouldn't be having stuff like Concord, for instance. Oh my goodness, what is Sony doing? Or you have Ubisoft that has been delivering flop after flop after flop. Like you realize, yeah, that they definitely lack a cohesive response. Like they're now receiving the feedback.
Both to the leader themselves and to the organization. And particularly at senior levels, I think some executives worry that it's political, that feedback they receive isn't unbiased about performance, but it's affected by rivals who might yearn for that seat, by people with opposing agendas.
People with opposing agendas. So people who disagree with you. I mean, see, this is the thing. Recently, if I'm not mistaken, John Deere, Ford, Toyota, those are companies that recently decided to basically not participate in further DEI expansion. And thing is, that's feedback. They know their target audience, and their target audience is not into that type of stuff. So I don't know if you're in a certain business, your target audience shouldn't be shouldn't have opposing agendas to yours. That just that doesn't that doesn't make sense.
If you ask most CEOs, when's the last time you got feedback that genuinely made you stop in their tracks? It will be years.
Wow. And is that their choice, or because they feel they've got to the top, or is it because they don't have time? Why is that?
Well, if you think about it, to give your boss's boss's boss serious feedback, you've got to be really vested in doing that, haven't you? Why?
There's more ways to get feedback. Like, I have a feeling it's pretty obvious that there's way more ways to get feedback. It's just that they don't care. They literally don't care.
Why would you do it? It's a
Career
career suicide.
yes, career
No,
ending.
so I think you should absolutely bank on the fact the more senior you get, the less people are going to tell you things that will be distasteful to you. And you have to actively put processes in place, which Goldman have, to make sure that their partners don't operate in an echo chamber.
Goldman Sachs has just over 46,000 employees, of whom just 400 are partners.
I wonder what that means. I'm not entirely sure. 400 partners?
New partners are selected every 2 years, and this sophisticated feedback program helps them to develop as leaders.
So all the things you've talked about suggest to me that a leader who is aware of this, how they're changing, how they could perform better, has a better chance of staying in post for longer, and not either because they leave or because they're ousted by a board who's not happy with the changes. Would that be correct?
If you're listening to disconfirming feedback and feedback from people who aren't thrilled maybe with every part of your performance, you have a chance to react to it, whether it's to dispute it or change it or act on it.
Are you likely to drive better with an accurate dashboard? Yes, you are. And similarly, you're likely to lead better and more sustainably with accurate and regular feedback.
What would be common things that executives might need to look at?
I think one thing I see a lot is unintended consequences of their actions and words.
Yeah, that sounds about right. As I said, they're not aware of their situations.
You know, so they think they've done this in good faith and this was their intention, and they're genuinely baffled that it was interpreted like this or understood like that.
Did they do it in good faith though? Or did they do it because it was a trend?
I think leaders underestimate how crisp their communication needs to be and how repetitive it needs to be in order for people to understand what does the boss think.
So they're calling people stupid? Okay, I'm not gonna interpret it like that. I'm just gonna assume that there's a lot of miscommunication.
Does that play into not really understanding the impact they have on the impact of power and status on the people around them?
It's quite common in our experience that executives don't realize how senior they are. They don't realize how many people are looking at them.
So you even look at something or make a flippant comment about it, people take that as a judgment.
So you can't do that anymore.
You can't do a lot of things. You can't do a lot of things, and people need to get really smart to that quickly.
We're all human. We don't want to think about the waters closing over our heads. And presumably that's magnified if you're a very powerful person. Who takes care of the psychological piece of preparing a CEO for transition?
Oh, honestly, sorry, it's such a hot button for me. I just think most succession plans are about the who and not about the how.
Yeah, I agree. So I was having this conversation with this guy. He was telling me that for more civil servant jobs, such as like police officers and firemen, there's been a growing problem of you need to basically know someone in the department in order to get a job in there. I'm not saying that's the case for all jobs, especially in the free market, but I'm aware that for higher paying jobs, such as CEOs, you definitely need to know the people. Otherwise, otherwise talent is not gonna get you all the way there.
And I think there are three opportunities here that that companies can really up the emotional choreography of how a CEO leaves. Because they fail to tune into, they fail to ask the question, what really matters to people here? So they do the contract and the shares and all the legal stuff. And the reason I think you get so many sort of spanners in the work at the end is, people realise things that they've invested decades in are going to be trashed. And
That's because you don't spend decades on stuff. Unless you're in the military complex, spending decades doing something or planning something is a terrible idea. People's minds and society itself, especially with social media nowadays, changes so quickly. It doesn't make sense to dedicate yourself a whole decade just to work on a certain project that will be irrelevant.
egos start acting out. I think often they are disenchanted, they're distracted, or they're trying to dominate it and say, I want my version of my legacy messages to
I can see that.
prevail.
I had a really interesting chat with James and Kate. One of the things that struck me was the importance they place on reflection and stepping back. Often leaders don't get a chance to do this. They're so busy. But making time and space for regular talks with trusted people can bring long-term, incremental gains in the quality of their leadership and extend tenure.
Just things go wrong. People get sick. People have trouble keeping their pants on. Things happen. If you're a really great business, you probably do have 3 or 4 people who you think could fill some of the great roles. In fact, you ought to. If you're a properly run business with a good board, they should have that. If you replace a long-running CEO, as with most managers, the longer you do something, the things you are good at, you continue to do well. The things you are not so good at build up. And so by the time a long-standing
Is that accurate? I mean, I understand that that's definitely how a lot of people function, but I would assume that the people in charge would be different. They would be willing to fix their weaknesses.
CEO leaves, whatever it was that CEO was slightly less good at is going to have built up as a problem. And so that's the other thing, is the new CEO is going to have to deal with whatever didn't get dealt with before.
CEOs are very well rewarded and have sky-high status, but it's lonely and hard at the top. And some people burn out or have hidden mental health issues. Those pressures are enough to dissuade many talented people from going for the top job. As a way to combat this, some major companies have adopted the co-CEOs model. This leadership structure.
Okay, I do think this is better. However, if a company is moving very slow with one CEO, it's gonna move even slower with two. Not saying that having two CEOs is a bad thing. I'm just saying that some companies will inevitably need to stay off of certain topics, and some others that that have certain businesses and certain areas that require an insane amount of shifts and turns and whatever, I don't think they'll be able to apply this. If anything, they might even need to split up into smaller companies, like specialized.
Creates equal heads of an organization.
The co-CEO model is a great one for bringing in fresh talent in the younger generation, because you can have a more seasoned CEO who maybe the board trusts with, the experience.
That's ideal. That's definitely ideal. What do you mean by young talent, though? Are you talking 30s? Or are you talking 50s? Since a lot of CEOs are even older than that.
He or she brings, and also if you have shareholders or certain stakeholders, they might not be as open to get someone younger in, or someone who is maybe different to the typical type, or who is outside of the industry. It makes it so much easier for you as a board, because especially when it comes to succession planning, you don't worry as much about a person leaving and your CEO leaving, because there's always a second person who can steer the ship and who can continue running the organization if for whatever reason one of the CEOs is deciding to leave.
Having people to share the burden with and having a spread of expertise sounds
Spread of expertise. If I'm not mistaken, Intel recently got rid of Pat Gelsinger, and in his place, they put a businessman and a marketing woman. And I don't know if that's for Intel, a semiconductor company. I don't know if that's a good type of expertise. One is a businessman, the other is marketing. I don't know.
like a great solution for increasing CEO tenure. So why aren't we seeing more partnerships at the top? Perhaps because power is intoxicating and it can be hard to let go and let someone else share your platform.
I thought CEOs didn't have that much power. I thought the power was in the chairman.
And being a co-CEO is like any long-term partnership. It comes with built-in disagreement and friction. That's something that will need to be carefully managed if it's going to survive long-term. Whatever leadership structure is being used, getting succession right is important.
When it comes to succession planning, overall, I think most companies are doing a better job than they would have 10, 15 years ago. They're putting time and energy into it. Not only what do we plan for the CEO, what do we do if our CFO gets recruited away and therefore he's not there as a possible successor? So I think a properly run big public company at this point has spent quite a bit of time doing succession planning. They may not have done it well. And I also think that the ones where, it's a big personality in charge, particularly ones where the founders are still there, they're not as good at it, because it's very hard to turn around and say, Elon Musk,
There's no way a founder's gonna leave their company, bro. There's no way they're leaving it. They are not leaving their companies. And to think that some founders actually get kicked out is just crazy. For instance, if I'm not mistaken, the founder of Kadokawa, bro's last name is literally Kadokawa. He got kicked out from being a part of the chairman.
what's your succession plan? So I think succession planning is better than it once was. That doesn't mean some companies don't screw it up pretty badly.
People get to the very top because they're single-minded and focused. Some of them are never going to leave
Some of them are never gonna leave. Yeah. What are these guys, like almost 100?
without being told to go. I think there'll always be dramatic CEO exits, with all the anger and damage that can cause to the leader, to their team, and to the business. For boards, keeping your existing senior people in position and performing well for longer has to be the starting point for any succession plan.
All right.